Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. So, in Squid Game Season 1 and 2, we have the player contract. And I have some notes here that I want to discuss with you. Basically, in the contract that they willingly sign, you can't quit the game once you've signed. If you do stop playing, you will be eliminated, which we know means deleted. Okay? And you can only leave if the majority vote. Now, what's brilliant about this is the element of democracy, free will, greed, and debt. Okay? Now, Sung Gi-hoon wants to be the hero, doesn't he? In the first game, he was able to see, like, this is quite strange, you don't know what's going on. But in Season 2, he wants to kind of wake everyone up to what's happening. And what I liked about the democracy element of voting, where it shows that just because you're the majority doesn't mean you have the best interest of the group at heart, right? And that plenty of people in Season 2 were like, just one more game. Thanos, the rapper with the discolored hair, who was pill-popping drugs that he kept in a cross around his neck. So he was telling another player, essentially, just one more game. You know, him and his buddies are quite bullies. And you'll see this as well. So the democracy element highlights that people can do atrocious things because of democracy. Connect that to how you'll see Democrats in America. They'll say, our democracy is at stake. He wants to stop our democracy. They want to stop our democracy. And it is always framed as the masses are smart, intelligent, selfless, guidedly people. Alright? No. They're not. There's plenty of people who can have their eye on the prize that puts your life at risk. And I really found that interesting. In another cartoon I once saw, I couldn't find where I saved it, but it has the creatures of the Wizard of Oz, the Tin Man, all them, Dorothy. They're all gathered around burning the scarecrow. And it says democracy. And a system that overrode your individual rights for the sake of the majority. Because populism and democracy, you can see how sometimes that could work, but we often overlook the dark side. And Squid Game does an excellent way of showing the dark side of voting, of democracy. We often hear dictator this, authoritarian that, totalitarian this, fascist this. But we don't hear the downside of democracy. And if you've read Plato, he didn't really have the best view of the rule of the mob. Okay? Now, translate that over to the workforce. We all want to raise. We want to unionize. You know, a protest. Like some nurses are hosting a protest and they want better working conditions. And you want those people in the boardroom to understand and the workers unite and stuff like that. Then you look at the popular vote versus the electoral college in America. Okay? There's so much you could look at to see the long range of the good and the bad of democracy. And Squid Game did an excellent way of showing that when the masses are united in debt and they are desperate, they will do things with the democratic system that will cause horrors. The other element is free will. And I like that element as well, because give me liberty or give me death. You'll hear stuff like this. Like, as long as you have free will, everything's going to be okay. You'll hear people say, religion is to control the masses, so we have to be free to do as we will. Do as thou wilt. It's a very Luciferian way of looking at it. And so, the whole spectrum of conversations concerning free will is fantastic to examine. So, these players, you want to feel bad for them because you feel they didn't exactly know what they were getting into. But your free will get you into scenarios where it's not always the best, right? It's called consequences. It's called accountability. You led yourself into that trap. Now, the free will is glorified when it's unleashed, uninhibited. And so, when you see these players, they freely chose to call the number on the card, to go to the pickup spot. They woke up in their bunk beds, saw the scene, okay? They signed a contract, and they continue to play. They freely read the contract as well, and they signed it. Then later, when a game gets too rough, they're like, okay, I want to bounce someone out of this. No, you signed, you freely signed the contract. And the contract is binding. And what I like about that is it has a little bit of the old folk tales of Rumpelstiltskin. If you've ever read the riddles of Rumpelstiltskin, and even if you've seen, what is it, Shrek the Third? I forget what number it is, but there's a Rumpelstiltskin character who gets Shrek to sign over stuff. And it's a really cool way of highlighting contracts and loopholes. And then you'll notice how Song Gi-yoon, and then in the first season, his friend was able to mention to the rest of the players to remind them about the voting system. Because it's fascinating, because Song Gi-yoon has to remind the people about the clause that if you vote, you can get out of the game. Some people sign without really reading. Now, we do that in our own lives when it comes to the terms and services, terms and conditions of like Apple, Facebook, you name it. We often don't read it, and we have no choice if we really have to click the OK, because we won't be able to use the product, right? And then they steal all our data and censor us and do all that kind of stuff. Like PayPal changed their terms and conditions, and you know, things switch up. But reading the fine print is essential, and legalism is a field where law is pretty intense, and you can go by the letter of the law and really get people into trouble. You'll notice how people can weaponize law to go after their enemies, find these niche laws, really cause trouble for people. And so you better read what it is you're signing. And you also hear people who signed contracts without a proper lawyer looking at it realize that they really got themselves into a bad pickle. They got themselves into a bind. So the contract element of Squid Game, mixed with free will and democracy, is a multi-level thing of, you lot chose this. You chose it. You're right? And persuasion in democracy comes a long way. And in another element in this is the debt. Now, America has switched to a debt model. What do I mean by that? Debt for a car. The prices of cars are quite insane when you look at it. Okay? Just for your sticker, for your registration. I mean, smog check. There's so much stuff where they're like, money, 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 we're going to suck you dry. We want you as poor as possible. Okay, never get off the hamster wheel. Keep grinding. Debt for college. If America cared about education, why would you have to pay so much money to hear a bloated professor teach you something in a strung out course that could be condensed, and you could learn that on your own in less time, right? You're paying for credentialism. You're paying for the prestige badge, okay? And it's not that necessarily you're getting a quality education all the time, unless you're going for like med school or something. But it's that you were willing to fork on these high interest debt loans to link yourself to a bank for quite some time, okay? And you're going to be a student debt person, and you cannot, as of now, you cannot claim bankruptcy on that. And home ownership is a key part of Americana. Okay, it was like the dream. I mean, the colonists literally came from the slums of England, and they are, well, they did, I can't say they are because it's the past tense, started taking land with Western expansionism, and they brought a whole different way of living than the natives did. And then it became private property, right? You were no longer working for your feudal lord. You were no longer a serf. You had property rights, okay? Now, to get a house, debt, car, debt, everything is debt, okay? And this is not a system that's conducive to prosperity, and it's a real way of silencing people. When you look at the policies of woke DEI and things like that, you also see the cancel mobs on both sides, okay? Where people want to get you fired if you say something, which then means you can't have a good democracy if people cannot openly communicate, because they won't actually be informed voters. Because if you say the wrong thing, you ask the wrong question, you will be canceled. And then when you're canceled from your high-paying job, you will not be able to pay your debts. And you're going to go into even more debt. Okay? And so the greed element plays in as well when it comes to gambling. America has a lot of gambling stuff. How many social media influencers have you seen that promote gambling? I can name a lot. And it's quite sad. Why does YouTube allow gambling ads? It's really strange, isn't it? And let's look at fiction. Let's look at The Sopranos. There was a character there who got himself into massive debt and, couldn't pay back the mafia. Now, why has cinema consistently showed us what happens when you can't pay back debts? And Sung Gi-yoon, he was in debt for a lot of money. Remember when he was in season 1, chased down by these mobster-looking guys, these loan sharks, and they went to put a knife up his nose in the bathroom? And remember, Sung Gi-yoon had to sign a contract signing his organs away as compensation, which is really dark. So, America, lots of casinos, and if you recall, let me just dig into this out here, the addictiveness of casinos. I recall a video where a woman, she was on one of those slot machines, she's twirling back and forth in her chair, she starts peeing in the chair. She's too anxious to get up and go to the bathroom because she's fed so much money into this machine. She feels that if she gets up to go to the bathroom and someone else sits down, they will get the chance that she was going to get. So they just pee right there. And I recall under the video, a casino worker said, this is actually way more common than people realize. We are mopping up piss consistently. And she was actually a pretty looking woman, okay? And I was surprised that she would do something so disgusting, like a base animal, in a public place. Like, what's going on here? That is, who wants to smell like that? But she felt pissing on herself was worth it in order to get that potential, slot payout, whatever it's called. I'm not familiar with all the different games. And Andrew Tate as well has shares in casinos. And so you look at a lot of influencers, they push casinos and gambling. In Islam, gambling is haram. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us great wisdom as to the dangers of gambling. Okay? If you look back in old school Americana movies and shows, you'll see Christian cowboys drinking whiskey, playing cards, and betting, gambling. And if someone can't pay, there's a shootout in the saloon, isn't it? And consistently, I think if you can consider it gambling as well in Red Dead Redemption 2, one of my favorite games. There's a card game in there as well. So even in the video game world, you are gambling, and it's It's absolutely wild. And so, when you see these players afraid and so in debt that they're desperate enough to murk their fellows, you recognize the dangers of debt. And remember, in Islam, there's tons of hadiths about debt. You are to avoid the debt, and you shouldn't die with debt. So think about it. Islam talks about don't get into debt, okay? That we are slaves of Allah, so we have an element of free will, but we are bound by the Sharia, okay? And greed, there's tons of hadiths, subhanallah, that talk about, one of my favorites is that you're only owed bread, water, shelter, and clothing to cover your private parts. And that you are a passing traveler in this world. And there's ayats in the Quran that talk about the glitz and glamour of this world. So don't trade this life for the hereafter. You're going to have splendor in the hereafter. So don't sell out your soul in order to get worldly gain, because you cannot bribe yourself into paradise. Now, remember, there's other ones that talk about someone would want to ransom their family, their close of kin, all that jazz, to get into paradise, to avoid punishment, to avoid hell. You cannot ransom yourself. So, think about it. Islam has perfected, in my opinion, a moral code that keeps people out of trouble. Now, America and Western society, gambling is great. Do it all the time. Social media influencers, gamble, 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 baby. Gamble it away. Take on all that debt. Be as greedy and selfish as you want. Climb that corporate ladder. Step on those heads. Upcharge as much as you can in order to get all that capital. It's a dog-eat-dog world. So get yours. That's pretty much the ethos of America. It's not the 17th century anymore. Okay, the wolves of Wall Street. How many crypto scams? Okay? It is quite revealing, isn't it? I enjoyed how it made us see a side that isn't really talked about in school. In your philosophy class, if you go through Plato's Republic, you'll learn about the mob and Socrates and the dangers of that. But I would argue in political science classes, democracy is framed as the superior ethos for governance. And this is just not the case. Just not the case. I think it's so important if you're gonna study ethics and such, that you examine, just because the majority says this, don't make it right. Because all you gotta do to sway the majority is to bribe them or put them in fear. Carrot and stick method. If you vote this way, I'll reward you with X, Y, and Z. If you don't vote this way, I will do X, Y, and Z to you and your entire family. You can coerce the masses. Okay? And how many people are kept so busy working because they have to pay off their debts that they don't actually get to exercise as much as their free will, and they don't actually get to study what it is that's being proposed. So, if people actually wanted the best forms of democracy, they would liberate their population from debt, make life more affordable, and encourage people to use their free will to educate their minds. But you cannot even get some information without paying a lot for it. And if you want to teach history, hey, now you gotta go get a PhD in history. Now, I'm not saying that you should go to someone to do brain surgery who didn't go to med school. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that if you want people to have access to education so they become more informed individuals, you need to promote it and de-promote nonsense. But then you get into the bread and circuses that is talked about by Karl Marx. And in Squid Game, when people see that piggy bank, which is a symbol of corporate greed and capitalism, you know, it types into the psychology of hoarding wealth. And in Islam, we know you're not to be a miser. You're to help the needy, and that by feeding the poor, you expiate some of your sins. You know, we are not told to hoard wealth. We're not goblins coveting gold coins and, you know, rubbing our hands and sniffing dollar bills. We're not told to behave that way. And so, the philosophical ideas that you can derive from Squid Game is something that will keep you entertained for quite some time. And I really enjoyed that, because a lot of Americans are told, you know, if you don't take on this debt, you're a loser. What do I mean by that? Well, I recall being in high school, and then recruiters from Weber State University coming in and handing out the pamphlets for the university. Now, you're just a pup. You don't know about banking. You don't know about interest rates. You are told that if you want to be somebody, you got to take on all this debt. But you're not ever advised on how to gain knowledge in a more proficient, affordable manner. And if you look at as well how there are a lot of self-taught individuals, and then they start to make money, you're like, okay, this is another path. The internet has shown that you can be self-taught in many areas of life and monetize that, and you're going to be just fine. The fact that there are gamers who play video games and they're making more than someone who has a bachelor's degree, you know, is fantastic. It's just like, wow. Fanciful and mesmerizing. Who could have predicted that future? And then if you look at how there's people who use AI to make nonsense kid songs, and they upload all these different songs, they monetize that, and then, you know, they're making money. It's fascinating. College is also pushed upon women, and it pushes back their fertility. You know, they're told if you don't go to college, you're a useless space, you have no ambition, you're a dredge on society, just being a mom is for losers, and you need to be like Angelica's mom in the Rugrats, and grind away, baby. Just put your eggs on ice, stuff yourself full of pills, you know, pop back those Manhattan cocktails and get to work. Shimmy, shimmy, Devil Wears Prada. And you can see the soul-sucking nature of that. And so, the debt angle of education, of housing, medical debt in America. How many people declare medical bankruptcy? See, the whole thing about debt, it used to be people wanted to have a little nest egg. They want to have some money. But the modern Americana, the modern values, don't actually want you to have wealth. Debt is slavery. You are not free. And so by keeping people in debt, they must shut up and do what you say. The players in Squid Game, because they're in debt, they have to bite their lip and participate in the life and death contests. Okay? And recall, when they're voting, how many players are like, the amount of people who have been eliminated, if we all took a share, it still wouldn't be enough to get the creditors off my back. Right? Now, we have exorbitant amounts in Squid Game. Right? Exorbitant. They're so large. But I want you to look at the average credit card debt of Americans. Look at, imagine a person. They got medical debt, student debt, debt for their car, debt for their house. Say what? And how Americans are so greedy and materialistic. If you don't have a house, if you're not overspending on your credit card to look like you have money, if you don't have a PhD, master's degree from a university that's overpriced, you know, they will judge you. And a part of American judgment, an obsession with hedonism and materialism, is what causes so many people to feel like losers, which pushes more people into drugs. Because they feel like they haven't made it. The value system of America has consistently changed. And what it is today, that new mantra of you will own nothing and be happy, you will only be able to afford to rent, is quite a sad thing. It's quite a sad thing. Remind yourself as well that the players in the Squid Game are also not fed very well. They're not fed well so they can compete properly. They're tired. As they become more tired, dirty, they don't take baths. You see them covered in other people's fluids. And you see that, they're sleeping in a place where other players attack them. They're going through quite a traumatic experience. Think about people in the concrete jungles, we call them, in the projects. They go to sleep, they hear gunshots. They don't get to eat very well because there's food deserts, because too many people rob the stores and steal. They just don't obey. Right? You can't get the theft to go down. Too many drug addicts as well, pissing in the bathrooms and causing problems for the employees. So, the free will angle is fascinating because go even deeper. Those players, they say in season 2, you notice how Song Gi-eun lets the others know when you shut off the lights, the soldiers and the front man, the higher-ups understand what's happening. And the upper echelon of those elite rich people who like to watch it like a Coliseum sports spectacle, they watch on their screen the people attacking each other. Because those who want to stay want to take out those who will vote against what they want. And then those who want to leave, they know they have to eliminate the other side's numbers and terrify the other so that they can leave. So, I want you to think about how they did that. Both sides chose, based on their greed and desperation, that they must eliminate their fellows because of their personal situation and that they find no way out of. And so, those who know, if I don't pay off these debts, I'm in trouble, so I gotta stay. Gotta risk it all. And others realize, my luck's gonna run out. If I don't get out of this place, I'm gonna pass here, like pass away, die, be murdered. So I might as well fight to the death to try to get out. Better that I try in than not at all. You see that? So you have these desperate souls fighting to see whose will reign supreme. And both sides willingly chose to get in debt, poorly managed their finances, and allowed their free will to guide them into areas of life that were subpar, especially those in gambling debts. Alright? And it became ugly. Once they were in debt, desperate, lack of food, lack of access to water because they were not allowed to bathe, and the psychology of being able to bathe, their dark side came out. So, when you see certain pockets of society where people have forgotten about them or get angry that you're giving them food and stuff like that, you can see that the greed and people trying to preserve their eggs, hoarding their eggs, they are fearful of those who come and ask for a handout. Right? We can't feed the world, we're heard, even though we got food waste. So as Americans, think about this, debt is high, inflation is high, so Americans are getting less and less access to nutritious food, and junk food and processed food affects your health and your gut, which affects your mind. So you have sick people who can't afford health care, who can't afford a house, and then they start to turn on their fellows in this sort of dog-eat-dog world, this sort of brutal nature of survivalism. And then, when you're in this survivalist mindset, you will use democracy in a different way. Okay? You will scapegoat other people for your problems while not looking at the higher-ups. Remember, in Season 2, Song Gi-eun tells the people, right, he gets a little group, his little militia, and he wants to go get the head honchos up in the offices. Because they're the ones who are doing the games. He wants to be the hero. Not for us to attack each other, he says, but to go after them. Alright, isn't that interesting? Whereas the MAGA crowd, their greed, their desperation doesn't say, hold our politicians accountable, hold the corporations accountable. No, it's the brown man's fault. It's the brown man from India on the H-1B visa tech worker stuff. It's the brown Latino working in the fields, picking avocados. It's their fault. Or the woman from Guatemala who's a nanny, who's going to use the Medi-Cal services. It's her fault. I'm poor. And then you see this fervor because Americans are so used to a comfortable lifestyle, so used to indulging on cheap goods made by China, Malaysia, Indonesia, alright, and getting produce from Mexico and not having to work on farms themselves anymore. Even the vineyards that grow the wine, they have migrant workers there. Even them, they're like, well, we can't, we've got to blame them. We just can't allow them to have any path of mercy. So, because Americans are so in debt, they've started to be this dragon on the pile of their assets. And just like Smaug in The Hobbit, he knows if you're going to come in to take one coin. Right? He doesn't want to share. And he will flame anyone who dare take some of the coins of his. So, when you look at how Squid Game has made us realize much of our own society, that's when it gets into brilliant writing. Will the writers continue this intelligent path in season? So it'll be season 2, part 2, because we didn't really complete season 2. But at least in season 1 and part of season 2, they were intelligent writers. They say they're going to get Leonardo DiCaprio in the next one. Will this go off the rails and have a sort of Walking Dead ending? Who knows? Or will it have a great ending like Breaking Bad? We'll see. Hopefully they don't have some writers like in Game of Thrones season 8 that take it totally off the rails and piss off all the fans. But the genius on the darker levels of Squid Game make you touch on many subjects. It's not just that it's entertaining because there's a contrast of kids' games mixed with death, bright colors mixed with death, right? Or classical music mixed with violence, because Hannibal Lecter with Anthony Hopkins, who was a cannibal, he's already used that classical music with gore. So, classical music and violence being mixed together is really nothing new. So, it's not niche because of that. What's niche about it is the competition between wills, the emphasis of debt, of greed, okay? But also medical debt, alright? Because, if you recall, the front man, he mentioned, we don't know if it's 100% true yet, we do know his wife died. Because remember, he's the brother of the cop. So we don't know if his story is 100% true, but he mentions the medical needs. And remember that the little girl, who her dad was eliminated, but she's in the hospital, and her dad cannot afford the medical bills, right? Okay. Now, soldier number 11 is a woman. She's a defector from North Korea, from my understanding. I think she will have a soft spot and pay the medical bills of the girl who has a rare illness. Alright? But Squid Game highlighted medical debt, gambling debt, okay? And also billionaires playing games on the stock market and all of that in season 1 and season 2. You see all the different spectrums of debt. And that means, in your own society, look at what your nation promotes, what is legal, how your culture is changing, where could this lead, What are the dangers of democracy in different contexts? How is democracy manipulated? How is it artificially guided? Okay? So, remember the movie as well, The Purge. Citizens are able to have this night of indulgent violence. Okay? Remember that the bread and circuses angle, you have to keep them entertained or the mobs will turn. The other angle, intoxicants, keep them drunk, high, and humping so they never collect themselves and organize to come up to the masses. Think of the movie A Bug's Life. The grasshopper says, the ants are more than us. If they unite, we're going to be in trouble. We need to get our food tribute. Makes our lives easier. There's so many things that you can dig in and see. And Squid Game has an interesting way of bringing that to light. It's not just, it's just a bunch of violence and, not that niche. But those games are also fair play. But, I would not, the games they play, I wouldn't do well in that. I don't know how to play those games. Some of those games look actually pretty hard for a kid's game. Kids' games we play in America seem to be a lot more easier than the ones they play supposedly in Korea. So, that seems like, the first season playing marbles, and then dachi, you're like, this is hard. I never played marbles, right? My grandma had a jar of fancy marbles, and we would just pour them on the floor and make a mess. We didn't actually play any games, right? Or tug of war. It's walking on those glass. One is, the two different types of glasses, and you're like, what? The ladder bridge in season 1. Now, the cookie one as well in season 1, where you have to get it out of the shape without breaking it. A lot of these are ones that are a race against time, and you have to keep your cool and stay driven and work as a team. The coolest one, I thought, in season 2, the game, which shows what people will do to each other in order to win the game, where it's you have to select 3 players, then 2 players, and it's on that spinning carousel. They have to go into a room, and how they have to there's alliances. Pretty intense. So it does have a ingenuity about it. It's not just like Saw. If you've seen the Saw series in horror, it's not just raw gore like that, taking off your own foot, right? I think a good movie that touches a nerve has a philosophical truth to it, a political angle, okay, an ethical angle, mixed with nicheness. It's creative. And Squid Game offers that for us. So, this show can also motivate you to, when you think about greed, to say, hey, you know what, maybe I don't need that Bugatti. Maybe I don't want to go into credit card debt so I can front on Instagram so I can get big booty hoes in my DMs. See what I'm saying? Maybe I can accept not having a retarded amount of collection of expensive handbags to impress my friends. Maybe I don't need to get 13,000 injections of Botox into my face so that I can have better self-esteem so other women think I'm beautiful. A lot of women will get plastic surgery procedures on debt. In fact, let's touch on it further. The one of the characters is a trans. We'll do more on that individual later. But the trans is there to pay for that eunuch surgery. The elective cosmetic surgery. Now this is even more clever because the question of what should the government fund? Elective, cosmetic versus medically necessary. It's a huge question. But it also hints at that character's desire to transform themselves. It doesn't just highlight the cross-dressing eunuch individuals. It highlights as well women who will, like Joanne Rivers, keep paying these doctors, like Madonna as well, to just keep on altering them to the point where they just don't age with grace. Okay? So the female angle, the medical cosmetic angle of going to debt, put it on the credit card so you can have instant gratification and an extended period of time of your beauty enjoyment instead of not taking on the debt, accepting your path of aging, and using that money for a better purpose. You see the selfishness that comes out. Alright? Affordability. What people will be willing to do to change their bodies. It's a very fascinating angle. Because each player is in there for a different reason, and when you take out that reason, and then you look at your own culture, especially American culture, by the way, you're like, what will people do to alter their bodies? How much debt will they take on? Who will they become in order to achieve that goal? How will they change along the way? And the question of what humans will do to each other for money is something that is brought up consistently, especially with the cartels, especially with the American gangs, especially in prisons, where people will shank another person because they didn't get, 3 cartons of cigarettes. What becomes valuable? It's fascinating. The fact that women will pay an abortionist to dismember their own child just so that they can continue to get ran through by guys. Okay, and if you look at the data, what are the reasons why women get abortions? Materialism plays a role. They don't want to have to minimize their lifestyle in order to take care of a child. But they don't get on birth control, and they let men finish inside them, but have no accountability. They don't even go to get the Plan B, a pill from Planned Parenthood. They won't use rubbers. It's just the greed element, misusing free will, the cosmetic debt angle, the sick medical angle of like you're actually sick and can't pay. Every character highlights to you the cycle of debt and how it can affect you and ruin you. How do you break free from that? How do you not even get yourself in the Squid Game in the first place? Stop letting your free will slide you into the prison of debt. Think about it. Use your free will better. Now, the paradox of your destiny is written for you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what's going to happen to you. That's a paradox above my understanding. But I do know that I can decide if I'm going to cook spinach or eggplant. I can make choices in life. Okay? And so, we do have an element of free will. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can shelter us from some of our consequences of our poor free will choices. But no doubt about it, you're going to get into some scenarios where curiosity killed the cat. And that phrase is very important for people because we forget. We forget. Use the Squid Game Season 2, I'd argue, to remind you that you don't need to keep up with the Joneses. You don't need to be dirty because you're poor. And you don't need to not have style because you're poor. It means that you need to set your priorities right. And you need not cling your self-esteem to the material surroundings of you. And you're not less of a human being because you're not filthy rich. Right? Something to think about. Because that piggy bank filling up with money with the death of every individual, psychologically it's like, well, if more people die, I get more. What's happening right now? If we do mass deportations, these people say, we will be more rich. You see the brainwashing? Blame the poor brown farm worker, nanny, hotel worker for my suffering. Don't blame the elite watching it on TV who set up the game in the first place. You know? It's fascinating. You know, it's something to think about because, further, The gladiatorial games, people, peasants, and different classes went and watched that in the Colosseum in Italy. I really want to be able to see that place because it's been whitewashed. You know, the actual brutality of watching people at end, when poor people got to get some seats sometimes, they were literally thrown bread, right? And just the way the shape, you know, people are on the bottom, and like it goes up, and then where the emperor sits, you got the senators, and then you have the whole business of training gladiators. Some were slaves, some were freedmen. Of senators having some of the best fighters, bringing in tropical animals, lions and tigers, right? Something to think about. Thousands of years ago, humans had the hunger to see it. And the gladiators sometimes could buy their way out, but they had to fight and live and kill others. Now, the Squid Game characters are doing a modern type of gladiatorial game. It's not with shield and gladius, the weapon called the gladius. Gladiator using the gladius. No. They're there by their own choice because of death. And it's a spectacle of bloodshed. Humans have this about them. Why do people watch roosters fight? Dog fights? Why are we so fascinated with battle scenes? Why are we so fascinated with when a jaguar jumps down from a tree and straight mauls a crocodile or a caiman or whatever they're called over there, alligator thing? You see raw power dominating the other because we know deep down in our psyche as well that humans will always have to have a survival instinct. Why do we like these zombie movies where the living have to fight against the hordes of the dead? Winning and loss, contest of life, right? But in each scenario, there's a different reason for entering into that, and there's a different prize at the end. Squid Game highlights a modern gladiatorial system. And the fact that it's on a private island, it's very difficult to find. And the fact that there's an emergency exit tunnel type of ladder thing for the others. And the fact that, there's another twist in here, examine the organ angle of this. How many people today, they'll drink like a fish. You tell them not to drink, screw you, don't judge me, I'm free, I can do what I want. Just like I've had several people in my family die of alcoholism. One of my grandma's sisters on a waiting list for a liver transplant, but she was chugging, throwing them back like you wouldn't believe. Her and her husband. Okay? Now she wants an organ transplant. So you got people waiting for organ transplants who put themselves in that bad situation. You have other people who are good, like children and whatnot. You see the prices of organs. You also hear the horror tales of a guy goes to a hot prostitute in Brazil. He wakes up and one of his kidneys is gone. Right? Organ trafficking is a big problem. You also get into how in China they have tried to grow organs in pigs. They're trying to figure out ways to be able to grow or harvest organs for the amount of people who have skyrocketing cancer rates. Okay? And there's another conspiracy around, if you say you're an organ donor, that there are corrupt people who will let you die because they'll get a payoff from those who will harvest your organs. So they won't resuscitate you because they'll think you're too far beyond and they'll say you are an organ donor on your card, and you know there's some corrupt in that system. It's a fascinating thing to think about. I'm not an organ donor. But the point is, okay, there's a lot of spectrums on the whole organ market. But Squid Game throws that in there as well. These players, you feel bad for them, but their organs are going to be used. And soldier number 11 doesn't like that. She goes through and blasts these still alive people. In Season 1 and Season 2, they're trying to get the freshest organs possible and sell them. So, it's a paradox, isn't it? Remember, the front man in season 1 says, I don't care if you eat the organs, pretty gruesome, what you do with the organs, but you have to keep the anonymity of the player's identity in order to keep the game fair. And so they know there's organ harvesting, and then in season 2 we see that there's a head up guy who's part of the operation. Alright? And so not everyone is privy to the organ harvesting. But all these players are gonna potentially have their organs sent out, which will save lives, but for the highest bidder. So the medical debt plays a huge role in season 2, and organ harvesting. So it's something really trippy about that, because you think in your head, at least they're not wasting, right? But oh, that's gruesome. But they chose to be there. They used democracy. They voted to stay. They lost the vote. So what are you gonna do? They're the ones who called to go in. You see? So there's all these moral conundrums where, like, well, they chose to get in debt, so they went. They lost, fair and square. They couldn't complete the task. They were eliminated. And then, because there's teamwork in that series, they didn't curry enough favor and gain popularity in the democracy. So they were expelled. You see? Because you can't trust anybody there, but you do need alliances. Isn't that fascinating? So, Squid Game Season 2 and Season 1 highlight democracy, free will, debt, and greed. And I found it to be quite intriguing. Let me know what you think. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Support the channel. And until next time, see you later.